Yo, what is up guys, Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. Again, apologies, I still have some sort of cold, but we move on, we deal with it, and this is a prediction for a fight that I'm really looking forward to. Best fight of the year so far, David Benavidez versus David Morrell at light heavyweight. Now, I do apologise if I am a little all over the place in this video for obvious reasons, but it is what it is. Anyway, fight goes down at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. A fight between two unbeaten light heavyweights, and the WBC interim title that is held by David Benavidez will be on the line. Basically, the winner of this fight becomes the number one contender for the winner of Benavidez versus Bivol 2. But let's get into it. Tail of the tape, David Benavidez has a record of 29-0, 24 of his 29 wins coming by way of knockout. David Morrell has a record of 11-0, 9 of his 11 wins coming by way of knockout. David Benavidez is listed as 6'2", with a 74.5-inch reach, whereas David Morrell is listed as 6'1", with a 78.5-inch reach. So Benavidez is 1 inch taller, but David Morrell has a 4-inch reach advantage, which could be significant on the night. I would still say Benavidez is a naturally bigger guy, but not much in it. You know, this is the first time we've seen Benavidez fight a guy more or less his size, who's in his prime or near his prime. But the same could be said for David Morrell as well. David Benavidez is an orthodox fighter, whereas David Morrell is a southpaw. David Benavidez is 28 years old, basically in his prime, whereas David Morrell is 27 years old, both in their prime. David Benavidez does have more experience though, and he has fought better competition. You know, guys like Caleb Plant, Alexander Vodzik, despite me having issues with that fight, Andrade, etc. You look at Morrell's resume, and, you know, his best win, I would say, is Hot Rod Kaladzic. Outside of that, you know, he's fought some kind of mid-tier guys, but, you know, this is a big step up for David Morrell, it has to be said. But how do I feel about this fight? Well, going into it, first thing we should say is, both guys are coming off bad performances. David Morrell against Hot Rod Kaladzic, in that fight I felt he kind of struggled. Kaladzic was boxing. He was fighting in like a pure boxer style, whereas Morrell was, I guess, trying to walk him down, trying to land big shots. He was forced to be the aggressor in that fight, and I don't think that really suits Morrell's game. I think Morrell is best when you're coming onto him. He's like a boxer puncher / counter puncher, and I just think stylistically, Hot Rod Kaladzic was a bad matchup for David Morrell, especially right now where David Morrell doesn't have the most experience in the pro ranks. But I felt that was more down to a style matchup more than anything, I have to be honest. And I don't think that really tells us his chances in this fight because, you know, Kaladzic is totally different to David Benavidez. Benavidez, he kind of struggled with Alexander Vodzik. And it's weird because obviously Vodzik is a much better fighter than Kaladzic, right? Historically, I know Vodzik is past his best. You know, Vodzik came out of retirement, had a few fights, then he took the Benavidez fight. But the Vodzik fight looked weird to me. I have to be honest. I don't think Vodzik, put it this way, I don't think Vodzik left it all on the line. I really don't. He was kind of boxing within himself, was still giving Benavidez trouble. And in the second half of that fight, Benavidez looked gassed to me, and Vodzik did nothing. It was like Vodzik was a sparring partner. It was like he wasn't there to win. It was like he was a sparring partner. So, you know, when we compare both guys' last performances, I think the one difference is I actually think Morrell's fight with Hot Rod was real, whereas I'm not convinced that Benavidez's fight was real. You know, I don't think Vodzik went there to win, to tell you the truth. And I think going into this fight, both fighters' last performances are playing on people's minds. So that's one thing I'll say about the last performances. Now, this fight here, I guess we'll start with Benavidez. Benavidez is what he is. What he does well, he does well. And what he does well was really effective at 168 because Benavidez was the much bigger man in basically all of his fights. Against Andrade, against Lemieux, against Caleb Plant. Benavidez, walk you down type of guy, high guard, rapid fire combinations when he gets close and when he has you stationary. Likes to rip to that body, likes the uppercuts through the middle. You know, he's that guy who tries to overwhelm you, and he really did that at 168. Not only with his output, but his size. The question I have is, will that style be as effective at 175 as it was at 168? You know, Benavidez, who had the reputation of a destructive fighter, never really put a dent in a past his prime Vodcik. A Vodcik who was forced into retirement, forced into the hospital by Artur Beterbiev. Is this style conducive of being successful at 175? I'm not convinced it is. Maybe Benavidez just needs more time to settle in at the weight. But, you know, you look at that Vodcik fight, one thing I noticed was, despite Benavidez being big, he didn't look strong, whereas he looked strong at 168. So I'm not sure how the power carries at 175, nor the strength. In this fight, I think Benavidez has to be a lot more cautious of his defense. He took a lot of liberties at 168. Never really paid for it. Got caught up here and there by the likes of Andrade in a round or two, against Plant in a round or two. Got dropped by Gavril early in his career. You know, there were moments where Benavidez would get tagged up and his lack of defense would show through, but it didn't really matter. Based on what I saw from Benavidez and his first fight at 175, I'm not convinced he can take those same liberties. I do think his defense needs to be better at 175. Obviously, Benavidez primarily relies on the high guard, and I think he needs to be, once again, using that defense, using that posture. That's what he does best. That is his best form of defense. When he tries to lean his head back or roll with shots, he's not as effective. But his high guard is actually pretty good, Benavidez, when he uses it. He covers his face and chin well as a lot of his body. He kind of crouches it. He kind of like hunches into the guard, and he does really well at protecting his body as well. One thing I'd like to see from Benavidez, though, would be to add the ability to punch off the guard. So soak up pressure on the guard and basically counter off the high guard. I think Benavidez has the hand speed to do that. Does he have the dexterity? I'm not sure. Benavidez, to me, has always struck me as a quick learner. He started boxing relatively late as a fat kid. And I think that sort of tactic in this fight could be very beneficial because Morrell does get a little wild at times when he's the one who is trying to create his openings and trying to force the initiative. Morrell does get a little wild at times. Sometimes he'll lead off with crazy power shots like wide sort of hooks or uppercuts from too far out. And I think if Benavidez could add that ability to counter off the guard, he could catch Morrell unawares, and you know, he could catch Morrell when he's lunging in, so to speak, by just countering off the guard. Benavidez has the hand speed to counter, and he has countered in the past, but it's not a massive repertoire in his game, and it's always something I felt he should work on. And I actually think this fight, it would be very beneficial for Benavidez to work on countering in general. You know, try to bring something different to the table, because I do think that Benavidez has the dexterity. I think he's got the speed to be able to counter quite effectively. And like I said, we saw this with the Hot Rod fight, and I know Hot Rod is stylistically completely different, but every time Morrell, again, forces the initiative off his own back, he does take a lot of risks. He does lose his shape a little bit. He does leave himself open. So yeah, I do think that Team Benavidez should be working on countering in their training camp. Aside from that, and aside from, you know, trying to be more defensively cute and whatnot, Benavidez should also stick to what he does quite well, you know. I think Benavidez works the body relatively well, and against a guy in Morrell who doesn't have a whole host of experience at this level, An early body attack, early pressure on that body could be very beneficial. You know, Morrell is a guy who has a spring in his step, and he's a very explosive guy. You want to sap that energy, sap that movement, sap that explosivity, work that body. Particularly when David Morrell is against the ropes. I don't think Morrell is the most amazing at punching off the ropes. So every time that Benavidez has Morrell in those positions, I think working the body is paramount. And also one thing we need to see from Benavidez in this fight is more of a jab. Because, you know, we saw him against Caleb Plant, and in the first half of that fight, he basically tried to walk down Caleb Plant without a jab. And that resulted in him getting outboxed in the first half of that fight. Plant was just taking a backward step, popping his jab, 1-2, rinse and repeat. And in the first half of that fight, Benavidez looked incredibly basic. In the end, he walked down Plant because Plant's got poor stamina, but, you know, the first half of that fight wasn't great for Benavidez. I don't think he can make that same mistake again in this fight. I think the risk is much higher this time around because, unlike Plant, Morrell could walk David into something. So I want to see David jab his way in to try to give Morrell something else to think about, to try to offset Morrell, to try to force Morrell back, to try and push him back, because there's a difference. There's a difference between trying to walk somebody down and they're backing up voluntarily, more so than you're walking somebody down and they're backing up because you're making them back up. And if Benavidez can use that jab as he comes in, uses that jab as a front foot weapon, uses that jab to move Morrell to where he wants him to be, Benavidez's pressure is going to be that much more effective. So we need to see more of a jab from Benavidez. And also, lastly, we need to see a better stamina from Benavidez in this fight compared to his first fight at light heavyweight. You know, that's just my opinion. As for David Morrell, he's an interesting fighter. I've always liked David Morrell. I think there's very real talent there. I've basically followed this guy throughout his whole career. His early fights on the PBC, him winning the WBA regular, I think it was, against Lennox Allen. And for the most part, I've been pretty impressed with David Morrell. You know, he's a quick-handed, I would say, boxer-puncher with some counter-punching out of that southpaw stance. You know, quick hands, decent power, decent dexterity, decent foot speed, explosive. I think Morrell, there's a lot of talent there. I do. You know, he's got really good punch variety, right hook out of a southpaw stance, left uppercut, straight left hand, body shots. Morrell's got good punch variation as well. Decent combinations when he opens up also. Now, for David Morrell going into this fight, I think most people would assume that David Morrell has the advantage when it comes to classic pure boxing. And a lot of people are going to be saying, well, Morrell needs to be boxing off the jab, making Benavidez chase the fight from early on. Try to build up a lead, you know, because ultimately Benavidez is the A-side. Morrell has to win the early rounds, like I said, build up a lead, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And I see that as a very sensible game plan for David Morrell. And I think it's a game plan he can achieve and he can pull off, you know, early on in the fight. I think he can win the early rounds by boxing and moving, using the jab, trying to time Benavidez coming in, use those quick legs, you know, boxing on the half step back, firing the 1-2, firing the 1-2 right hook, and making Benavidez reset, etc. That would be smart, and if Morrell does that, it makes sense. But it's not that I disagree, but I kind of want to see Morrell be more aggressive in this fight. Try to put it on Benavidez early on, because I know Fight Phil made this point, but I don't think this reflects on Benavidez as a person, but more so him in the ring. I think he's a bit of a bully, Benavidez. He's kind of somebody who likes to be in control. He likes it his own way. We've not really seen Benavidez have his moment of crisis, and his behaviour in the build-up to this fight has been a little peculiar. I think he definitely sees Morrell as a threat. I think Benavidez realises that, this isn't Andrade, this isn't Caleb Plant, this is a guy who is close to Benavidez' size, who's in his prime, who's quick, who's explosive, plus he's got a little bit of power. We've not seen Benavidez in with that sort of guy yet. Vodsic should have been that guy, aside from being, in his prime, but he wasn't. If I'm Morrell, if I'm training Morrell, first couple of rounds, I want to see a Morrell who's expansive, who's firing hard 1-2s, holding his feet, hard 1-2-3s, ripping to the body, uppercuts, try and split that guard of Benavidez, try to land some hard shots, try to throw in combination, actually hold your feet from round 1, and especially make sure to work that body. Because I'm expecting Benavidez to think that, yeah, Morrell's going to box early on. He's going to try and outbox me. He's going to try and follow suit as to what Caleb Plant did. If I'm Morrell, I would want to switch things up, surprise Benavidez, try to utilise my power, because in terms of one-punch power, there's no doubt in my mind that Morrell hits harder. Benavidez is pure accumulation. I think Morrell has more one-punch power. He's clearly more explosive. He's clearly more explosive. And I want to see Morrell try to get Benavidez' respect early on. I want to see how Benavidez responds to that power. I want to see how Benavidez responds when somebody is just putting it on him. That's what I want to see. I want to see Morrell ask those questions. The issue with that is if Morrell can't get the respect of Benavidez, and he spent the first 2-3 rounds really opening up, what's that going to do for his gas tank going down the stretch? Who knows, but I think it's a risk worth taking. I really do. Again, I'm not even saying he shouldn't box from the outside early on and try to pick up the rounds. That's a sensible game plan, and I think it will work also early on. But I want to see Morrell really try to test that chin, to test that heart, to test that body, to see what Benavidez is about, because it's all well and good walking down guys you've got a 15-pound advantage on, but what happens when a guy more or less your size is putting it on you? Nobody's asked that question of Benavidez yet. Morrell can. He's got the size to do it. He's got the speed to do it. He's got the explosivity to do it. And he's got the power to do it. So that's what I want to see from Morrell early on. Nice tight guard, walk to the centre of the ring and try to put it on Benavidez. And I think if Benavidez then exchanges with Morrell, that's when it becomes really interesting, because if Benavidez, let's say Morrell does what I think he should do and step to Benavidez, let's say Morrell does that and Benavidez doesn't just kind of go into a shell and cover up and not really throw back. If Benavidez then fires with Morrell, I think that's when it really favours Morrell, because when those two guys punch with each other, because of Morrell's explosivity, because of his timing, because of his more traditional skill set, I think that favours Morrell as well. If Benavidez starts to punch with Morrell, I think Morrell is favoured in the exchanges. I think he's a better natural counterpuncher than Benavidez. So if Morrell could draw Benavidez into a firefight early on, something special could happen. Now, if Morrell does that, if he's punching with Benavidez, I think he's got the advantage. The only thing I will say in those moments when Morrell does open up, he is susceptible to the left hook. That's the only thing, but I think it's a risk worth taking. So yeah, I think Morrell should be aggressive early on. Try to win the early rounds, try to take something out of Benavidez, and providing he wins the early rounds, I think then he should go back to a more traditional boxing style and counter-punching style as Benavidez gets more desperate, because we saw when he fought Caleb Plant, he got kind of desperate in that fight, and he was able to win because Plant gassed out, but he was leaving so many openings when he tried to run Caleb Plant down. He was leaving so many openings. So if Morrell could win the early rounds, if he could take something out of Benavidez, and then Benavidez becomes desperate, I think that more traditional boxing style, counter-punching style, could then come into its own. But I think Morrell having success in that style will be very dependent on him having a good start, him winning some early rounds, him being ahead after 5 or 6 rounds. If he can make Benavidez desperate and really open up and really chase the fight, then I think that Morrell can be a bit more low output, take that half step back and try and walk Benavidez into a big straight left or a big right hook. But I think he should, the primary focus in this fight should be to win the early rounds. Now, it's what method you want to do that with. Do you want to try and box, or do you want to do what I said and be more aggressive and try to put it on Benavidez? That's the question, you know. I know my theory, my opinion carries a lot more risk, but I think it carries a lot more reward. So yeah, I'd like to see Morrell start the fight aggressively, try to put it on Benavidez while winning rounds, and then kind of like slot into your more natural quote unquote Cuban counter-punching style, providing you're ahead, providing Morrell's ahead, providing he's a few rounds ahead, then yeah, go to that sort of natural counter-punching type of style. But yeah, I mean, this fight is very interesting to me, and it's a weird one to predict because when it was first made, when it was first talked about, it's been talked about for a couple of years, I've always kind of favoured Benavidez because of experience, and because of work rate, and because the fact that he's the A-side, to be honest. And let's be real, that really matters on these PBC cards more than anywhere, I think. But on the flip side, I've watched both guys back recently, and I think Morrell is a fighter with a higher ceiling, whereas I kind of think Benavidez is as good as he's going to be. But I do think Morrell has more room to improve, and I think Morrell is more naturally talented. It's just how they match up now, you know? Maybe the lack of experience will cost Morrell, I don't know. I find this fight really hard to predict. And this is the prediction part of the video. I really want to pick Morrell, I'm not going to lie. I really want to pick Morrell. But my brain is telling me, just pick Benavidez on points, it's the obvious, it's the sensible pick. Even if he loses 7-5, he's going to win on the cards, right? I'm really struggling with this one. I'm going to go... I want to be brave and pick Morrell, but I'm not going to be brave. I'm going to say Benavidez by robbery. Or Benavidez by controversial decision. By the way, I can see either guy winning this fight legit. I can see either guy maybe even getting stopped. I think any outcome is possible. But my prediction is going to be Benavidez by gift, by robbery, by controversial decision, whatever you want to call it. That's going to be my pick. That's going to be my pick. I'm second guessing myself. And that's the only thing I don't like about this fight is I think there's a strong possibility that politics are going to be involved. But the fight itself has me really excited. You know, because if it's on the level, I'm really struggling on this one. Who to pick, regardless. I'm going to go Benavidez by controversial decision. Anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Delboy. Peace.